Hi, I'm Jim O'Shaughnessy, and welcome to Infinite Loops. Sometimes we get caught up in what feel like infinite loops when trying to figure things out. Markets go up and down, research is presented and then refuted, and we find ourselves right back where we started. The goal of this podcast is to learn how we can reset our thinking on issues that hopefully leaves us with a better understanding as to why we think the way we think and how we might be able to change that to avoid going in infinite loops of thought. We hope to offer our listeners a fresh perspective on a variety of issues and look at them through a multifaceted lens, including history, philosophy, art, science, linguistics, and yes, also through quantitative analysis. And through these discussions, help you not only become a better investor, but also become a more nuanced thinker. With each episode, we hope to bring you along with us as we learn together. Thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy this episode of Infinite Loops.
Jim O'Shaughnessy is Chairman and Co-Chief Investment Officer of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management, where Jamie Catherwood is an associate. All opinions expressed by Jim, Jamie, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with yet another episode of Infinite Loops. Today, I am very excited about my guest, Perth Tolle, who has been a friend of mine for several years when I met her at a really geek fest, wonk fest, which we'll get into later because the presenter there is actually helping you. Welcome, Perth.
Thanks for having me, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I love your story. You went to Trinity University in Texas. You moved to Hong Kong and you got bitten by the freedom bug. Why don't you tell us a bit about how you got from there to here and all about your indexes and everything else?
I was born in China and then I came to the US at around age 9 and then grew up in Texas after that. After college, I did go to college in the US. And then after college, I went and lived in Hong Kong for about a year. I was there to spend time with family and also to see if I could learn about working in China and Hong Kong. So I did travel a lot to the mainland, to Beijing, Shanghai, and throughout Hong Kong, Shenzhen. And so that's where I really realized how different my life would have been had I stayed in China. So some of the things that hit home for me. So I had a friend who I called Maggie. She was the same exact age as me, and I was 23 at the time. We were exactly the same in most every way, except she had no birth certificate, no school records, no hospital records, no Social Security. So she doesn't really exist on paper because of the one-child policy. And her parents chose to register her brother for school and for existence and all of that stuff. And she was my same age. I was born at the beginning of the one-child policy. So that made me realize, hey, policies matter. And this particular policy, its legacy is changing the whole demographic landscape of the country. And we're dealing with the ramifications of that, beginning of the ramifications of that now. There's 30 million missing women in China by official estimates. And by other estimates, it's as high as 60 million. And that's generations of people you just can't just replace. Also, there's 30 million men in my generation who had no prospect of finding a wife. So things like that really changed the way I thought about freedom and governance and how this may matter. And also, I saw the difference in the markets between the Hong Kong market, the US market, and the China market. So it's interesting that we're talking today because we're seeing some of those things happening now in China, like the crackdown on today, Didi and other tech companies that has been going on recently. So that's an interesting topic that maybe we'll want to delve into as well.
Sure. And as an American, I listen to these stats and I honestly can't believe that. Why are we not calling them out? Is it because of cheap labor? Is it because of our own business interests? What's going on?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't know the answer for everybody, but everybody has different reasons. So we recently on FinTwit, we've seen circulating a lot of things where Wall Street titans have been doing China's propaganda work for them. So
Charlie Munger, when I saw Charlie Munger, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe Charlie Munger is saying that.
But if you pay attention, he has always been very pro-China because he's made money there. So he has business interests there. When Joe Tsai of the basketball team spoke out recently, he did even say in his article that he was being quoted in, I have a lot of business interests in China. So it's like these businessmen, they almost have to speak in code. They have to say, okay, blah, 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 propaganda line. By the way, I have a lot of business in China, hint, hint, wink, wink. I have to say this. So it's like you kind of, after you see enough of it, you realize some people are talking in code. Charlie Munger probably, it doesn't look like to me he was talking in code. He seems like a true believer, which is pretty scary. But also, I mean, he's definitely not the only one. He's the only one who came out recently. But Larry Fink is a huge China apologist. And there's just a lot of them out there, especially on Wall Street. And I think for Wall Street, it's easy to understand, I guess, because if you think about it, like with that many people in China, there is a lot of potential for money to be made. With the aging population in America, when we had the boomers retiring, that was a huge deal for us in the financial services industry. And I think that maybe they're looking at China in the same way. That is a huge market that maybe they don't want to miss out on. And that's very difficult to turn down when you're being offered access, special access even, because these authoritarian countries don't grant access to just anybody. They'll only give it to their top few most favored companies or people or industries. And so the tech industry, for example, has enjoyed this favor for a very long time in China. And now you're seeing that favor pendulum swing the other way.
I used to think when I was much more impressionable and younger that by doing business with these kinds of countries, that we could perhaps open them up a little bit. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
That if they saw the fruits of a freer market, I always used kind of Korea as my example, because as you know, I'm sure, South Korea used to be a very authoritarian state. Some would argue that it still is a little bit, but it's certainly a lot freer than it was, say, 30 years ago. Why do you think that hasn't happened in China?
The freedom wongs will tell you that economic freedom is a necessary but not sufficient condition for personal freedom. Personal freedom meaning civil and political freedom. So you have to have first economic freedom, and China did kind of open up a little bit on that front since the Mao times, which had really abysmal policies. Millions of people died of famine. It was that bad. They reformed and opened up, liberalized on the economic freedom side, opened up to
for
trade.
Quite a while under Deng.
Yeah,
I mean,
for 30 years. Time. And only recently with Xi did that pendulum swing the other way. I think the telltale sign for me was when he made himself kind of emperor for life. So when that happened, I was like,
always
okay.
A bad sign. Always a bad sign.
But at the time, I don't know if you saw this, probably not, but on Twitter, I think Tim Seymour of CNBC said, oh, this is a good sign. This is stability. Market likes stability. And I was like, you want to bet on that? And so we took a bet on how China would do. He was like, all right, A shares a year from today. We'll see how it does. I won the bet. He forgot about it though. Or maybe he wanted to forget about it because I won.
Don't let him hold his feet to the fire.
And then he asked for more time. So, so I did give him more time. And I think after that time that I gave him, he did win, and then he lost again. So now I'm winning again. So, so this is like a never ending bet now. I don't know when I actually get my lunch or whatever it is. I don't even remember.
When you're next in New York, I'm taking you to lunch for no bet. So, I mean.
Okay, awesome.
So spell out a little bit. Let's talk about your indexes, okay? Tell our listeners what they're all about, how they're put together, et cetera. I think they're fascinating. As you know, I've been a big supporter.
Thank you. So as you know, with emerging markets index funds, most of them have very large allocations to autocracies. And that's due to one, emerging markets country classifications, and two, market capitalization weighting. So with market capitalization weighting, the largest market gets the highest weight. And so China has a 40% weight in most emerging markets index funds. And then you have additional allocations to Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Russia, Egypt, and so forth. So you have definitely over 50% direct allocation to securities in autocratic countries, not even counting countries that do a lot of trade with China and all that indirect exposure. So there's just a lot of exposure to the biggest autocracies. And so we solve that problem by doing freedom weighting instead. So instead of market cap weighting, we freedom weight. And that just means the highest freedom countries get the highest weight. And so as a natural result of freedom weighting, the worst autocracies are excluded from the index, but not because we exclude any country arbitrarily. It's just a natural result of the freedom weighting methodology.
Can you walk me through the methodology on how you rank freedom?
We get the data, the freedom data, from third-party independent think tanks. We use all our data with permission, and there's 76 different variables that go into these metrics. So I categorize them into 3 categories: rights to life, rights to liberty, and rights to property, or civil, political, and economic freedom. The data providers categorize them into 2 categories: personal and economic freedom. And these include things like terrorism, torture, trafficking, women's rights, rule of law, due process, criminal procedure, civil procedure, freedom of speech, freedom of media, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, private property rights, business regulations, tax rates, trade. The more trade, the better, and so forth. So all of these combined give us a composite score for freedom level in 162 different countries. And we just take the emerging markets data set, the country set out of those countries, which is about 26 countries right now. We weight them according to their freedom levels. We do have minimum size and liquidity requirements on the country level, as well as the security level. So some countries like Czech Republic are very free, but too small, so we don't include them. And Peru, very free, but too illiquid. So for it to be tradable in an ETF, which is the ETF is based on the index, we always knew this would be an ETF. So we had to make it very tradable.
Just out of curiosity, what is the freest country of all on your matrix?
So in the emerging markets, the freest country is Taiwan.
Taiwan, that doesn't surprise me. How about all countries?
New Zealand is number 1.
See, I love New Zealand. I try to stay out of politics, except for like the one thing that animates me is I'm fiercely anti-authoritarian of either the left or the right. I don't care what they're selling. And New Zealand, that does not surprise me at all. Where does the United States?
United States is 17.
Oh, man.
17 out of 162.
That's just kind of disappointing.
It has declined. It has declined in recent years, I think, because of the war on drugs and so forth.
Oh, yeah. And the thing that we do have in our back pocket, though, is we have this little thing called the Bill of Rights. And pretty difficult for, as much as it is my opinion that if we did not have the Bill of Rights, we would have speech law here. We would have all sorts of curtailment of freedom of speech because politicians just love to get around. They want to make all the rule and call all the shots. I think the world is changing so much that the governing institutions are so far behind the market that they're going to have to do something really radical to rethink and reinvent the way they try to govern, because it just seems to me that they're literally being ignored. I mean, when you look at the hijinks of certain individuals who will remain nameless out there 15 years ago, they would have been in jail. And now they can openly taunt government officials and nothing seems to happen. So I mean, that's neither here nor there, but it's good that we have this Bill of Rights and this Constitution.
Oh, that's amazing, actually, because without that, without rule of law and without this constitutional kind of institution in place, we would be in a lot of trouble. And that is what makes the difference between us and a lot of these emerging markets that don't have that. Some of these markets, they have a constitution, but it's ruled by law, not rule of law. That's a big difference. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And that is a very important institution that makes up the foundation of what gives us our freedom.
I think it's also the reason, another one of my little soapboxes that I'm always on, is that despite all of our woes, for the most part, at least to the people I talk to, the smartest, most ambitious, most interesting people in the world, they want to live here in the United States. And my attitude is we should let them. If they're getting degrees here, particularly let's start small and say they get a STEM degree. We should staple a green card to their diploma because that's what made this country great. This country was great because we let people come here from all around the world and try.
I mean, there's a reason why Steve Jobs didn't start Apple in another country. And Google, the founders of Google are from Russia.
I know.
So could they have done that in Russia? No, because
no.
I mean, that's just not even allowed. It's too much free speech. So yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And the B&O situation with Britain, how they're giving citizenship to Hong Kongers fleeing to the UK right now, they're going to get a huge influx of human capital from that. and very freedom-loving human capital. So the younger generation as well. So it's going to be a huge advantage for countries, I think, that are taking advantage of people just following where the freedom is. I think it's Walter Wriston that said, talent goes where it's welcome and treated well. And I would change that to where it can be free as well. So, and he says talent is not only people, it's also ideas, it's also money. And so that all follows where they can be free and well treated. And so I think these countries, and typically it's the countries that are freest that take advantage of migration from the less free countries as well. So that's something that the freer markets do have an advantage of.
I think it's just a massive advantage that we should try to maximize rather than try to minimize. I think there is a reason why the majority of patent holders are out of the United States. It's not because they're all of certain nationality. They're not. They are a great disbursement of nationalities, but they're in a country devoted to freedom.
And also, you know that those patents are going to be honored.
Yes.
There's repercussions if you are to infringe upon them.
Whereas the rule of law, yeah.
In China, if you have a business that's mostly based on IP, that business is going to be valued a lot less than if that same business were in the United States, because people know that IP is not protectable.
It fascinates me that I guess I get the metrics in terms of some of these massive tech companies, but I just think that the more we sort of play to our strongest suits here and in other free countries, the better off that we're going to be. Let's talk a little bit about our friends at Alpha Architect. So Wes Gray and his great team, they are the sponsors of this. How does that work? How are you working with
I'm
them?
the sponsor. So
okay.
I cover all the expenses of the ETF, and I have most of the upside of the revenues. And also I am the index provider. So I provide the index for that as well. Wes and his group at Alpha Architect are great. They were a natural partner for me because they're obvious freedom fighters, also ninja quants. So
shout out, I've been among my favorite people.
So Wes has been very much a mentor to me throughout the years. They were my first choice when it came to, okay, if I have to launch this on my own, who would I do it with? And I'm the one who convinced them to start this business where they help other people launch their ETF. So if you have an ETF that Wes is helping you with, you can thank me for that as well. So
that's terrific.
I'll take credit for that.
So how does it work? Tell me about the mechanics.
So they are basically a white label of the ETF. So they're providing the back office operations for the ETF itself. They're running all the ops on the ETF. They're doing the trading, sub-advisory. They're quarterbacking the service providers, the custody, admin, all that stuff that was done by different providers. They quarterback all of that. So instead of dealing with multiple service providers, you're dealing with one person or one firm. And that just simplifies the process for me. Also, I have full confidence that they can execute trades and do it right and in the way that's best for clients, tax-wise and all of that. So having them work on that side of it gives me full confidence. Like every time I get a create, or we haven't had any redemptions, thank God. So every time we get a create, I know it's going to be done right. And so I never worry about any of that. And that was important for me because this was my first ETF. And I didn't want to set up my own RIA just for one ETF. At the time, I wasn't considering a second one. And now we have all kinds of things in consideration. But at the time, this was the way that I wanted to do it because, and also I'm a one-person shop. So I don't want to be doing all the operations and be out there promoting the index and things like that. So they're great for if you want to make sure that the fund is operating efficiently and accurately. That's what I'd recommend them for.
That's great. What are assets under management now?
We have just under 60 million.
That's pretty decent for just a one-person shop. Is that mostly you out marketing this and talking to people about this?
The ETF is 2 years old. So that was my goal for the 2-year mark was 50 million.
Oh, great.
Actually, a week before the ETF turned 2 years old, I thought we weren't going to hit it because we were like at 44 and market was crap. I recently hired some PR help and I told them, hey, let's hold off on the press release because I don't think we're going to hit 50. And then that week, we got 13 million in flows. So we blew past that 50 million mark. And I can't take credit for any of this, not that week, not anything before that, for any of the 60 million. I'm telling you, this is an idea that has always been bigger than me. There's no way I could have done it on my own. Yes, I am the only one out there promoting it, but I can't take credit for the way that this has caught on with investors, or the way that people have been willing to come alongside and support us, like you, and the way that I met Rob Arnott, who is not only an investor in the fund, but an investor in our company. That's not something that I could have orchestrated. So this is something that I think people resonate with instantly because they understand freedom. And as freedom is declining around the world, people are understanding it even more. So I think the demand for something like this is just out there, and I wanted to give it its day in the sun. As you may have noticed, I stripped out any other factors. Like, I have no other factors in here except freedom because it's never been done before, and I wanted it to be something that existed in the market for people to be able to invest in who value freedom and want their investments to reflect that.
It's a pure play on freedom, which I think is great. I would argue that this should also fit into an ESG category.
Yeah, so we actually, as you may have noticed, I try to distance myself from
I've noticed.
Emerging markets ESG, especially because if you look at emerging markets ESG funds in the US, they all have 40% in China, additional allocations to Russia, Saudi Arabia. So I think freedom is the basis of all other ESG. And without that basis of freedom, all these ESG metrics in these countries, you can't even verify. So if you don't have free speech, freedom of the media, rule of law, there is no mechanism for accountability and independent verification of ESG data or any other data for that matter. So without that basis of freedom in place, I don't believe you can effectively do emerging markets ESG.
Do you publish a list of your holdings? I'm sure you do. Obviously, you have to. How often is that updated?
The holdings are published on any place you get your information, including our fund website, which is freedometfs.com. But yeah, it's published every day. It's all fully transparent. We do a rebalance once a year. So in January of every year, third Friday is when we do our rebalance. And that's because the freedom data comes out once a year.
Okay. Does that change very much?
It can, or sometimes it doesn't. So in the first year, 2 years old, first rebalance of the ETF, no countries changed. And we just went back to target weights. When I say back to target weights, I mean back to just freedom weights, not back to previous years, just current year's freedom weights. And then the second year, we had 2 countries dropped and 2 countries added. So sometimes it can be a very high turnover rebalance like that one, or sometimes there can be no changes at all. What I have noticed is that when countries decline in freedom, that's a very fast movement versus a increase. So it's based on relative freedom levels to your peers. So you just have to be freer than your peers to make it into the index. There is no line in the sand, and there is no 100% free country. There's no 100% oppressive country. Like even in Saudi Arabia, there are things you can do that are, you can engage in trade with your neighbor or whatever. So there's no 100% either way. And so we don't draw a line in the sand. You just have to be—
Wait a minute. What about North Korea?
Yeah, that's pretty bad. That one's pretty bad.
I think maybe they might get 100% on free.
That's pretty close, pretty like 99.9. So yeah, you just have to be freer than your peers. So sometimes the adds and drops are not due to one country's score increasing, but due to another country's score decreasing.
So the quant in me just has to ask this question. Are you seeing any analogs between takeovers, between cheapness based on normal factors like price to book, price to earnings, price to sales, et cetera? Are these countries that you're indexing to, are they materially cheaper or materially more expensive or no difference?
Most of the time we've looked at it, they're insignificantly a little more expensive, but it's insignificant. And I think that can be attributed to the premium that people put on rule of law and things like that. Just like in the United States, S&P, we've done better and have been more expensive than other markets for all kinds of reasons, but including that we have that predictability of rule of law. But one thing I would say is that I think Larry Fink recently came out and said markets like authoritarianism because they like stability or predictability, or certainty was the word he used. So markets like certainty, but he's conflating that certainty of restraints under an authoritarian system versus the certainty of, I know my contracts will be honored. So that's a different kind of certainty. And also I would even go one step further that markets don't like certainty. That's not where the alpha is. The alpha is in the surprises that arise from uncertainty. That's where you get the Amazons and the Apples of the world. It's not in the things that you can predict, but in what you cannot predict. And so we want to invest in the markets that have the conditions in place for that uncertain outcome to take place. So we want the innovative, the flexible markets that have the feedback loops on the ground level to be able to take advantage of market trends and so forth.
I think people maybe like Larry Fink are, let's be charitable and say that maybe they're conflating it with certainty of operations, et cetera, that type of thing. And if we're going to be uncharitable, they've made their pile.
Yeah.
And now they want everything to happen their way. I always try to apply those litmus tests to myself. And by that, I mean, would I be comfortable with the government being able to come in and do whatever they want to my business? The answer is absolutely not. And so why should I try to infringe upon your or anyone else's ability to do that? I'm always amused by the people who want the real authoritarians who let's put tax rates up all the way. And often I'll say something about, this is why people get confused about my political views, because on a lot of things I would sound like a real lefty. And then on other things I would sound like a real conservative. But I always just try to be objective. And people will often say to me, well, of course you're going to say that. You've done well, et cetera. And I'm like, you're missing the point. I'm 61 years old. I can just stop. The people I care about are the young people who, if you put these incredibly horrible benchmarks in place, they stop the young people from creating, and that would be a disaster.
No, you've absolutely been a voice for freedom out there. So I appreciate that very much. Going back to your valuations question, I think lately, though, the overvaluation in the China market has been noted. So there's been a huge overvalue. That one is an exception. There's been just huge overvaluation there. And as you can see by days like today, which are more and more often now, investors are realizing that and taking their gains off the table from years past because they're thinking, I think, and I agree with this, that China is a growth story of the past.
Interesting. Well, I'm a true OG quant, so I don't look at the market day to day. So I have no idea what's going on in the market
today. Okay. China tech is down like 6%.
Okay. Well.
So if you look at the China tech ETFs, they're all down like 5-6% today. It's kind of a big day.
Let's use that as a springing off point for you. Said you're investigating some other ideas. Will you tell me about those for funds?
There's lots of ideas that people have brought to us, like frontier, like fixed income, like US or developed market. I'm not as interested in developed market just because the value add there is very limited because most of those markets are pretty free. And when you have the free and transparent kind of information that's out there, it's available for everybody, the data is pretty reliable, then market cap isn't terrible. So it's not a bad way to invest in those markets. And so it's only when you have the inefficiency of unfree markets, like in emerging markets, that freedom makes a huge difference for the growth environment going forward. So I'm not as interested in developed market, just to be honest, but some people have requested like an all-world solution, including developed market. I mean, if I did something like that, I would just probably you could easily make that yourself, is my opinion. You could buy like IDEV and FRDM and you're done. So I'm not as interested in that, but the others are very interesting to me, like frontier and fixed income. But really what I'm doing right now, because as I mentioned, this is a 2-year-old fund. We just hit just under 60 million right now. This is a point where I do want to slow down a little bit and think, where do we want to go next? Because we launched something that's totally never been done before. And up to now, we've just tried to survive. And now we know that we've survived and the fund is successful. And it's, I think, a time that I really need to reflect, do some soul searching and see, okay, what is our purpose in the world now that we've brought this to market? And what's the next thing, if there is one, or maybe we just grow this. So I'm really kind of taking a step back this summer and just saying, do we need to launch another one right now? Or what is it that we should be doing?
So do you get any blowback? I mean, you're very vocal, which I really think is great. I applaud it. You put yourself into the arena, and my friend Trent Griffith convinced me that that takes a lot of courage. So congratulations to you on that. Are you hunted by bots on social media?
Sometimes. I'm used to it now. And at first it did surprise me. So when we first launched and people were talking about it on Twitter, I did get a lot of weird flack from mostly pro-China investors in Asia and mostly in Hong Kong. So that was weird to me in the beginning, but then I realized, oh, this is expected now. Once you have something in the public arena, like you said, yeah, that comes par for the course. I've gotten more used to it. I think in the beginning, you were one of the people that were like, hey, just ignore. So I've learned to do that better.
Good.
Thanks for that.
Of course, that's my
advice.
pleasure.
And also, I think in America, we do have freedom of speech. And so, and a lot of these countries don't now. And you can see it getting taken away in Hong Kong. And so those of us that have it, I do feel like we almost have a duty to use it for those who can't, because they really can't now. And so if we don't, then there is no one left. And so I do want to kind of use that freedom of speech where I can.
Which I think is excellent, and I applaud, because that's what people need to hear. They need to understand. It always kind of dismays me when I listen to people who I think they're not being disingenuous. I honestly think that they believe what they're saying, but they don't understand, for example, that some of the worst places for women, for example, are the most authoritarian. You mentioned Saudi Arabia, one-child policy in China. I mean, these are really noxious, horrible rules, and they probably disproportionately affect women over men, I would think. Although you mentioned that they're also affecting men, that men in China can't find women to marry, right?
Yep. It's 3-child policy now, but 2-child made no difference, and neither will 3, because the whole culture of our generation changed because of the policy. And that's just pretty much irreversible at this point for maybe a few generations going forward. And it also it has driven trafficking in and around the region. And as far as Colombia, women get trafficked to China because of the shortage of women, I guess, in China. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of these authoritarian countries. When we criticize the United States, it's nowhere close to what goes on in some of these other markets. And that's another reason why I think Wall Street has been so enamored with some of these authoritarian countries, is because they just don't know. Most people that work on Wall Street are privileged people in the United States. We do have some level of privilege to be working on Wall Street, to be working in finance. Most of us do come from upper middle class backgrounds. We lived in the suburbs very comfortably all our lives, where our entire life is packaged for us within a certain radius. And so we don't know what's going on in these other markets, and we can't imagine the horrors that are happening there. And so we are also more susceptible to be kind of falling trap to some of these narratives, like Luckin, right? Luckin. So it's going to be the next Starbucks of China. And here we're like, oh, Starbucks. It's great. Starbucks is everywhere. It's going to be the next Starbucks. Great. We all know what happened with Luckin. So I think if we project our optimism onto these other very authoritarian countries, that's a good way to get trapped by those narratives.
I think that's a really good point. And I think that that's actually really insightful, because you're right. A lot of people, and I used to joke that younger people who maybe didn't pay as much attention to the fact where, like, the old USSR and Maoist China and all of those types, and Cambodia under Pol Pot, they were horrible, brutal places where millions of people were executed. Suddenly, I tease them when they are like tweeting, "I hate capitalism." I always append it saying, "Tweet it from my iPhones while getting a Starbucks." And I honestly think that they don't stop and think about that. It's like, the only reason you can do that is because you live in one of the freest countries in the world. And nobody can take that right away from you. And I just think it's kind of like when I was a kid, they used to have these scared straight programs where if you were a juvenile delinquent, they would take you into the prisons. And
What?
no, seriously. So the prisoners would volunteer. I was never taken into one, but I did have a friend who got taken down as a JD, and it was called Scared Straight.
Wow.
What they would do is they would bring kids who were getting into trouble at a young age. They would bring them in, and the prisoners would tell them, here's the reality. Here's what's really going to happen to you.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah, it is, because the friend I had who that happened to, man, that was the end of his juvenile delinquency.
It straightened him out.
Yeah. I just wonder sometimes, though, that like, what would happen if we sent these kids to Cuba for a month?
Well, you can't do that, because look what happened to the kid that got sent to North Korea.
Right.
He came back in a coma and died. I mean, you just can't do that with these countries, that unfortunately.
No, I know.
Look at Hong Kong right now. The biggest story on Bloomberg Terminal today was this American lawyer.
Yeah, I read that.
He is now in jail for standing up for a kid that was getting beat up in the subway by the cops. And the cop didn't identify himself as a cop. So that American lawyer now in jail in Hong Kong for standing up for a kid that was getting beaten up.
Will there ever be a time, or is this just pie in the sky thinking, where the people of these countries, it's demonstrated they've tried the Green Revolution in the Middle East, Hong Kong, my God. I made a remark
really
once.
Tried in Hong Kong. I mean,
They really have.
They really made a showing. I mean, out of a city of 8 million people, 2 million were on the streets.
Amazing. And so does that ever tip, do you think? Like, you're too young, but when the Soviet Union collapsed and Romania and all of the other, Ceausescu got executed by the people. Is that even a possibility anymore?
I can't imagine it. Things have changed so much, right? Because now it's an information war. And by the way, just to go back for a second, totally random, Otto Warmbier is the kid's name in North Korea. I just want to say his name because he died.
Oh, thank you.
So he's the kid that went to North Korea as a tourist and then came home and died, and as a result of being in jail and tortured there for, I think, taking a flag off a wall. So yeah, I think things are more of an informational war these days, and things are more digital. So that's why you see hundreds of bots coming at me for doing a freedom fund. That's why you see from China mostly, but I've tweeted about my friends in Saudi Arabia and things like that, and gotten Saudi Arabian bots too. So, I mean, it's not just China. I think China and Russia and Saudi Arabia are the biggest. I think actually China and Saudi Arabia are the biggest on Twitter as far as bots go, the bot machines, armies. They all have their own names. Like Chinese bots are called Wu Mao, which means 50 cent army kind of in Chinese. And then the Saudi Arabian is something like, there was a hashtag like, do you know about the bees? And it's like the bees are either the ones that are fighting the bot army there. So I think mostly it's going to be an informational war, and China knows that and Saudi Arabia knows that. So they're going to mostly try to shut down information. I don't know if you noticed at the centennial, right before the centennial of the CCP, which was last week, Zhao Lijian, who is a spokesperson for their ministry there, blocked a lot of, he just like mass blocked all the pro-democracy people on Twitter. And so people on Twitter were like, I never interacted with this guy. Why is he blocking me? And it was everyone, like all of China Twitter was getting blocked by Zhao Lijian, the spokesperson there for the centennial. So what they do is they silence opposition. And so that's why they're silencing. That's why media freedoms are being killed off in Hong Kong right now, because they want to silence that opposition. That's the way that they're fighting this. So I think it's mostly going to be an informational war, and they're going to try to put out their own narratives, and anything that comes against their narratives of both history and what's happening in the present is going to be silenced. And that's why they don't have Twitter in China. That's why they don't have Facebook and all of this stuff, because for them, it's an informational war. It's a war of the mind. If you can control information, you can control minds.
Well, that's George Orwell, right? Right there, 1984. He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future. Propaganda is as old as nation states, I guess, maybe even predates nation states. Don't you think it's odd that in so-called free countries like the United States, you have this collapse of the mainstream media's credibility because they have just so bought into the narratives that their masters tell them to talk about? I mean, it's almost like, I had a friend joke that Pravda, which is the old newspaper in the Soviet Union, well, they were still the USSR, and Pravda means truth, which of course all my old Russian friends say everyone knew was the opposite. But isn't it kind of weird, don't you think, that here where we have all this freedom, that they're just kind of like, are they just trying to do this to survive? Or what do you think's going on with them?
With our mainstream media?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think that just from a freedom econometrician standpoint, not that I'm a freedom econometrician, from the data standpoint that I'm looking at,
I get it.
We still are very free as far as our media. I know that there's a lot of issues, and I can acknowledge that. There's certain media networks that I refuse to go on for those reasons. And sometimes I feel like maybe I should, just because why limit myself? But I think people are, as that happens more though, as these media outlets become like more tainted, I guess, people will become more, I guess, I'm using the word woke, but in a different way. They'll be more awakened to what propaganda looks like. So right now, or even before 2016, Americans were very, I guess, spoiled in that we didn't know what propaganda really looked like. It didn't really hit our soil as much, because propaganda now doesn't look like propaganda. And I think the free media here in the US and in other countries that are more free still have a responsibility to get the word out, to get the truth out for people who don't have that privilege now. I mean, that's another reason why we have to be very independent and try to maintain our freedoms because we're the only ones left.
So let me ask you, where do you think that you've gotten the greatest impact from social media, Twitter, we mentioned mainstream media, CNBC or Bloomberg? Where do you see a correlation if you do, like an appearance on XYZ or a podcast even? Where are you getting the most bang for your buck?
So it's a combination because when you're on social media, you get followed or noticed by other types of media, and then you go on their media. So it's really like one thing leads to another, and it's a combination of all of those. So I don't think it's one particular thing. I think, though, that for people launching funds and trying to figure out their marketing plans, I didn't have a marketing plan. I just did what I could do because I couldn't afford big ad campaigns. So I just went on Twitter because that's what I could afford. So mostly Twitter and LinkedIn, a little bit is what I did. But I mean, 90% of my marketing on social media was Twitter. I don't have Facebook. I don't have Instagram. But if you put your whole self out there, like if you make clear and transparent what you're about, people that are interested in either writing about that or having you on their platform will find you and help you get your message out. So again, this is not anything that I could take credit for, but early supporters like Eric Balchunas had me on his show ETF IQ before there was an ETF. I don't know if that's ever happened at that point. So it was just an index then. And then I've been on the show after that. Also others like Josh Brown, who was on Twitter a lot more than he is now, but he tweeted about us when we first met. And this was years before the ETF. So I think that social media, you only need one person to really resonate with your message to get a groundswell going. So you never know where that one person is going to come from.
Do you ever like just have a day where you're just like, oh, I need some resupply troops here. I'm the only one out here fighting
every
for
day.
fruit. And how do you deal with that? I'm actually asking that as an honest question because you're indefatigable. And how do you do that?
I don't know what indefatigable means, but I don't think I am that.
You don't tire. You just keep going.
Oh, no, that's not the case at all. I'm a mom and I do tire.
I know you are.
I'm tired right now.
So does your daughter Olivia make you more tired than these crazy authoritarian states?
Oh, much more. No comparison. Again, I'm not doing this on my own. And that's something that I'm so thankful for. So yes, I'm all the time like, oh my gosh, I need reinforcement. But also everything I've needed has been there. So this is something that I felt called to do when I left Fidelity. It is one of the reasons I left, but also mainly I just wanted to stay home with my kid at the time as well. But it's an idea that always pummeled me and would not let me go. And I think that it was, when I actually decided to do it, it was like very clear that it was now or never time. And being a mom is a big part of it because I didn't want to, even though Fidelity was great and I loved my team, I loved my clients, I loved my boss, and I found a lot of my personal satisfaction and identity in working there because I was there for 10 years and had a lot of success. And I'm very thankful for that. But when I became a mom, I just felt like, okay, I'll only do something if I can't not do it. And for this, I felt like I would rather try it and fail than not try it at all. There are very few firms that can bring something like this to market. iShares can't do it. I tried to talk to them into it, but they couldn't do it because it's too political. All the big ones are like that. So it takes a smaller firm who has no interest in business in China at any point that can be more flexible on this front to bring something like this out. And I'm just so grateful every day that we were the ones that got to do it.
Well, I have great admiration for you in doing this. So tell us where they can find your funds and what the tickers are and what's your handle on Twitter. We'll put them in the show notes as well.
So the ticker is FRDM. It's the Freedom 100 Emerging Markets ETF. Index ticker is the same, FRDM. I'm on Twitter at Perth_Toll. Our website is lifeandlibertyindexes.com. That's for the index. And the fund website is freedometfs.com.
I love it. Well, as another part of our show, we always ask this final question. The answers are really interesting from my perspective, and you really can tell a lot about a person when you hear their answers. And you're not going to like the way I'm setting it up because we are going to make you the empress of the world for
Yeah, I
one
really
day.
don't like that.
Well, I knew you wouldn't like it. I was actually thinking about how I was going to try to change it. When I was contemplating this, I was like, I know Perth is going to just hate the way I put this question.
I love that you knew that I would hate that though.
Yes, yeah. But here's the good news.
Okay.
Only one day. You can't kill anyone. You can't put anyone in a camp or re-educate them, but you can do two things. You can incept them. You can whisper something to them in their sleep, and they're going to wake up thinking, you know what a good idea is? I think I should do X. Give me 2 X's. What would you get people to do? Of their own free will.
Incept them of their own free will.
Well, they think it's of their own free will.
Okay. I would say that you are powerful and you have the power and the responsibility to change outcomes. Because I think for our investors, a lot of investors act out of fear of either deviating from benchmarks or underperforming benchmarks or getting fired or whatever. And I think that if more investors realize that they have the power to change outcomes, if you're in a position to direct assets, that's a position of power. And that's a position of honor and privilege. This is an honored profession. And we have a responsibility to that and to our clients, not just fiduciaries, but also we have the power to affect outcomes by the way that we invest, whether you're investing your own money or other people's. So if we know that, then I think a lot of us would invest differently.
I love that. Okay, so know your power and use it and exercise your power. I love it. Number 2.
I think number 2, I guess you're not alone. As an entrepreneur, sometimes, especially a one-person entrepreneur, sometimes we do feel alone. And so we feel like we have to defend ourselves or we have to do everything ourselves. But if you realize you're not alone, and I think that having a publicly traded fund out there is one way to really realize this a lot, is that, hey, there's $60 million other dollars in this fund. So you're definitely not alone in the way you're thinking about this. And you don't have to be out there every day striving and making things happen because it's not about you. Okay, so instead of you're not alone, I'll change that to it's not about you, because that changes your perspective.
I love it. I love it. I have such tremendous respect for you and what you have done, Perth. I really do. And I just think, boy, I'd love to clone you. I wish there was 1,000 people who were thinking and acting like you are. The world would be a much, much better place. And so I want to say thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
I do greatly admire you, and I can hardly wait to take you to lunch.
I can't wait either, Jim. Thank you so much.
Right.
It's such an honor to be on your show.
Thanks for joining me.